Thanks, Commander. Good afternoon, everybody. As he said, my name is Bonnie Gruber. I am with Delta Think, and I am very much an evangelist for capturing the user perspective in product design, development, and user experience. So I'll start here with a little thing that I caught along the way, this UX minus U equals X. And what I would say is everything starts with the user. So if you take them out of that equation, you end up with a big X, so don't do it. And it's kind of be core to everything that you accomplish with your development process and understanding how they work. And there's a nice quote here that I captured, that the first requirement for an exemplary user experience is to meet the exact needs of the customer without fuss or bother. Next comes simplicity and elegance that produce products that are a joy to own, a joy to use. So I'm really focusing on the first part in this presentation of that sentence. We'll talk about customer insight. We'll talk about how to capture that into the product development process, and then my partners in crime over here will show you how they've incorporated that, some of the tactics that they've used, how it's worked, and they have some good stories to share with you. So let me start a little bit with customer insight and why it's so important, what it means, and how we capture it. So for starters, what is customer insight? And I look at it all the ways in which we capture that information from our customers. There's a bunch of quotes up here, and there are phrases and comments and words that I think are important in how we serve our customers better, how we gather knowledge, how it helps us make decisions. And so in product decisions, in features and functionality and movement and content, all of that understanding about what's important to them and looking for revelatory findings and things that you may not have expected about the range of tools that they use at their disposal. Because we always remember your tool's not the only one on their desktop, it's not the only one on their mobile device. There are a bunch of them. So how they interact and how a user takes them all into consideration plays into how you design and how you develop and what's important. What's also important to know is, as we are all users of so many sites and so many apps, we'll easily assess the usefulness of a website or an app in seconds. It is a very, very quick decision by all of us and by our users and our customers as to whether or not something is valuable to them. And very, very quickly, you can run through these kinds of questions and think about the fact that they're going to ask these of themselves, in milliseconds, the same way we would do it. Is it valuable? Does it have value for me? Is it easy to use? Is it intuitive? And can you figure it out quickly? Do you need a lot of instructions? You don't want to send them to a help screen to figure something out that should be intuitive. Will they remember it when they return? Did they have to go through a rigmarole, or was it pretty easy to come back to and they know exactly how to search and they know exactly what they're looking for and how to rerun that? And are they overall delighted by the experience and did the content ultimately meet what they needed in a way that they will reuse your product again and again? So obviously you want them to answer yes to all of those. And in order for you to get there, this part of it talks about how you capture their understanding and their workflows. So part of our challenge also in doing customer insight work and market research is knowing what tools to use. And there are tons of tools out there. I'll talk about a couple, Pam will talk about a couple, and we'll go through different options and opportunities and what you learn from different tactics. And a lot of factors play into that. Whether it's the phase of development that you're in, what you're exactly testing, whether it's visual design, interaction, process flow, content, your time and resource constraints, that will always play a role in this. Even though we know there's a strong ROI, there isn't always an immense amount of time in every phase for it. So what do you have available? And also your ability and need to interact and combine tactics that are both qualitative and quantitative. So you bringing them together and understanding more of a deep perspective of how people use, as well as a wider perspective of opinions and processes. And it's not just once and done. It's actually a very iterative process. Different tactics take place at different points in the life cycle of where you are, what you're learning, what you're trying to learn about. And one of the frameworks that we use to think about that is right here for this customer insight framework. And so we talk about tactics kind of falling into these levels of level 1, level 2, and the most complex in level 3. And I have some pages that walk through them, but at the highest level, the level 1s are the broadest, and they get progressively deeper and deeper in terms of customer understanding, in terms of the depth of what you need to know about your customers as you go through the model. So this is really a framework that we keep in mind when we sort of plot our set of tasks and our set of activities that we're going to use, that we might use a level 1 at this stage, or we're going to use a 2 at this stage and a 3 at this stage, or we're going to use 2 level 2s here and here because we're testing these, but we'll mix it in with a 1 at another point. And depending on where you are, we always kind of keep that in mind. It's a nice little framework of perspectives. So if I talk a little bit about each one of these, I'll start with the level 1s. They are naturally designed to be a lot more high level, therefore trends, perceptions, behaviors. These do tend to be more quantitative, so you can get a large amount of information from a lot of different people. From market trends and perceptions, tracking changes in usage and access, and what people are doing on a large scale. And then of course, if you use tactics such as surveys, which fall into a level 1, you can slice and dice that information by certain demographics and behaviors and ages and workflow and work experience and kind of where and work location in terms of what different groups do in a wide experience. But you get a lot of information. You don't go very deep, as kind of this picture is meant to say. Originally, it's very high level, and you only go one step deep, but you get a lot of it from a lot of people. Other level 1 examples are things like competitive research, market analysis, analyst calls. You can usually do these pretty quick. So at different points in time, you can kind of run surveys, even with wireframes, even with just questions about how people are accessing things. And you can run short little surveys again and again throughout the process as you have questions, or larger ones at the beginning, and certainly at the end to test effectiveness and perception. Level 2s are meant to go a step deeper. So level 2s, you'll touch fewer people along the way, so it won't be this sort of mass gathering of information from lots of different people, but it'll be a lot more personal and a lot more depth of understanding. And you have discussion, and you can follow a process, and you spend a lot more time with people, not just seeing what they do, but asking them questions about why they're doing that, or what they think of certain things, and make them sort of articulate what they're doing, the activities that they're choosing to do. Sometimes they've never really thought about it before. This is just what I do. And you make them pause and think through, well, I guess this is what I have access to, and I needed this information. And in the combination of all their tools, they can come back and start to articulate what their process looks like. And through that, you begin to find as well challenges and complications with what they have at hand. So level 2s include these kinds of activities that we look at it: advisory panels and focus groups, in-depth interviews, usability testing and workflow analysis, user groups, and even customer training falls into that as well. And our point is that you get to really spend time with these folks. You're not going to touch nearly as many, but they're one-on-one a lot of times. They're in groups. They can be over the phone. They don't always have to be in person. Sometimes they are. But they allow you to capture lots of good information from a smaller set of folks. And then level 3s are designed to go very deep. These are a lot more time intensive. They're not just 20, 30 minutes on the phone with someone. Often they're hours of time in terms of tactics that really make you observe and understand and do research on how people use the environment of tools and content at their disposal, and what works well and what doesn't. And so we talk about level 3s with tactics like contextual inquiry and ethnographic research and observational research. And then even we're getting into prototyping and beta programs, where you put a lot of work into tools before you're showing them to someone. So what they really do ultimately is allow you to dig in, test something that might be functional in that regard, as well as observe and see all the tools that they have at their disposal. So research goals. Research goals will drive every decision that you have in terms of what tactics you're going to pick, what matters to you, where you are in your life cycle, where your challenges are internally in the development process. and what you need to learn ultimately from your users. And here are some examples of questions you might have. How do your members or customers use and apply the content that they find and read? What are they doing with it after they have it? How does it change their practice? How does it change and impact what they do? How do customers react to different print and or web design options? How are they using their mobile devices with content in your field? When can they use it? When can't they use it? I mean, that really comes into play, I should say, a lot. And I've interviewed lots of physicians in hospitals, and sometimes in the basement floors, they have no iPhone or smartphone access. And so it changes what you have to deliver from a desktop to an iPhone in that regard. How are customers sharing information and collaborating with colleagues? Can users even find specific elements on a page in a system? If you're doing some interviews in that regard, asking them to find certain things, and can they quickly find it? Is it obvious? How do customers evaluate and validate the content that they uncover? Are they reading, appreciating the content being delivered? And these kinds of questions then ultimately carry you to the next component, where we talk about complexity and we talk about investment risk. So even as you're in the process of dealing with user experience exploration, you also have to evaluate these aspects. So one of the things we look at is complexity, and how straightforward are your questions and your research questions? Are they just getting feedback on a website design and you have prototypes or you have wireframes that you're working with? Or are they very open-ended and you're trying to explore the whole impact of new technologies, or you're at the very early stage of a brand new product and you're understanding its features, functionality, and how it fits in with what they already have? So complexity from low to high will play a role in that. And then investment risk. And sometimes they're incremental improvements to the products that you're building, and sometimes they're really large and brand new. And then when we look at that, and you'll see kind of where these little levels of tools and tactics play out, we kind of look at things that are like low complexity, low investment. You might be okay with just a level 1 can play a role in that kind of scenario. But as you move around, I missed one. As you move around there, you'll see that something could still be low investment, but it's kind of complex. So you're looking at level 1s and level 2s that will play a role in that space. And then as you get to the higher risk kinds of product development activities, you're in your level 2s and level 3s to really make that worthwhile in terms of capturing user experience to avoid some of the risks that I think Gruber showed you from that video. Okay, so when seeking customer insights, we know we have all these tools at our disposal. And here's a bunch of them, for instance. And so picking them, we have our levels, level 1s, level 2s, level 3s. I decided I would focus on a couple for you in this presentation, and those folks are going to talk about some others as well. So I have a little bit on some of the in-depth interviews, which can be used in a variety of ways, and then some slides on contextual inquiry. So let me start with the level 2 example of in-depth interviews. So first of all, what's nice about these is they can be done at any time in the life cycle. So unlike, we'll get to some others that are better in beginning or end or somewhere in the middle, level 2s are particularly in-depth interviews and can kind of comment along the process along the way. Often these, and particularly with usability, these are in person, and they're one-on-one, and you can kind of sit down with lots of different things, whether it's wireframes or screen designs, or even interviews in terms of process, which some of that can be over the phone, actually. What's interesting about these, they are fairly structured. So in an in-depth interview, at least in my experience, for consistency in the data that you're going to capture, there's a very set script that you're going to follow. So it might be around certain usability aspects of finding things on a screen or running certain searches. But we typically run scenarios, and we ask users to work through different scenarios. And an example could be, for instance, in a physician scenario where we say, okay, you have a patient and she's traveling to, a third world country and she's pregnant, but she needs this vaccination. Can she still get it if she's pregnant? How would you answer that question? Is there a complication or a contraindication for that? And then have them run through that kind of scenario in person and watch where they click and where they go and what makes sense. So they find the information in 2 clicks, 3 clicks, 4 clicks, how long until they can answer a typical question that they might have as a user. But they are structured, so we will ask that same kind of question in each interview with each person. And however, I also say they're kind of semi-structured, because whether they find it or not, then you can really ask about the process that they went through, why they kind of went through that path, if it worked for them, if it didn't. And it can take you on tangents too a little bit, where, I'm always in even user interviews where they'll say, wait, can I show you how I did it on another system? And sure, on the wing, and you can wing it, and you can kind of see what they did on another system, what worked or what didn't work, and it's all information for how quickly they were able to get answers to questions that they have. These typically, in my experience, run from 30 to 60 minutes, so it is an investment in time, both on their end and your end. And you do have to do a bunch of them, but not too many. And this is fascinating that it always seems to fall in these patterns, and that's not my picture. I did pull it up from Jacob Nielsen, but it is absolutely my experience that 4 to 6 people, and you can even do 4 to 5, in a segment will typically get you all the data that you need. It starts to repeat itself very, very quickly in terms of the processes that people go through, the difficulties that they have using something, or what they like or what they viscerally do not like. You'll get that very quickly. I do say in a particular segment, because how a person works in one environment might be very different how they work in another environment, and where they are in their life cycle, if they're tenured with 30 years of research experience versus a postdoc who's just starting their career, might really analyze content very differently, might run searches very differently and use different tools. So you have to understand what segment you're in, but once you kind of define your segmentation, usually and like I said, he has in here 4 to 6, and I would even tell you it's 4 to 5. You have all that you need for that particular segment to capture the data that you're looking for. You'll find, almost all the key issues and how the work patterns start to repeat themselves. Particularly with wireframes, sketch, design, test, and repeat, you can kind of run through a cycle of a handful of people. Sometimes it's even the same people if you can get a good customer advisory board together where you can show them certain wireframes and test certain things, revise with your 4 to 6 users, capture, document, and feedback, and then revise again. So why use this tactic? They enable comprehensive discussion. That's what's really nice about it. You don't get a discussion in a survey, you don't get a discussion in competitive analysis, but here you really get a discussion, and it can take you in all different ways. You can explore your users' goals, their needs, their intentions, and frustration. And I've never met with someone who held back, so it's never ever been an issue where someone clammed up or didn't tell me what they think. They are always very open. It's certainly self-selective. They volunteer to be part of your study, so they certainly don't show up and then don't talk. But I will say I've never ever had that problem with people not speaking freely. And like I said, you can dive into the whys, not just what they do. Oh, the last point here about customer personas is also important, because you can build, based on your segmentation, the type of persona that you're working with, what their experiences are, and then you can extrapolate that as you can look forward to how those personas would ultimately use a more fully designed system. The other tactic that I have up here is about contextual inquiry. This is typically used more at the beginning stages of product development because it's so exploratory, and you're trying to really uncover work breakdowns and uncover challenges and where they are and what they're using in content sets, so that you can begin to design and build functionality and even come up with new product ideas. So these tend to be much longer interviews. They're in multiple hours, but they're great for user design projects. I've used them mostly even, like I said, at the beginning stage. You're going to develop something along the way. Let's do these observational research and see what people are using now and what works and what doesn't work. Also, for these, you always go to the user's place of work. to observe, discuss, and document their activities. So interviews, for instance, you can go into a conference room, you can find, a coffee shop, you can kind of do all kinds of things, even with in-person interviews, because you're gonna design or the scenario, what you want them to look at, and it's very structured. For contextual inquiry, it's kind of whatever happens, whatever they do, and a lot of that is an unknown. So you want to watch how they work in their place of work, and then you make sense of that data, and there's lots of systematic ways to go about that in terms of capturing insights and data and affinity diagrams, which are some of the pictures here, and then even mapping out process flows and what would work in those scenarios. For contextual inquiry, these, and I should have said also for in-depth interviews, they tend to be much more qualitative than quantitative, and they favor depth. They most definitely in contextual inquiry will favor depth over statistic and quantitative sampling, so you can see the workflows and context. You'll see our user interact not just with your products, and what's interesting with the contextual inquiry is that you do see the environment of tools at their disposal. So it helps you put a framework around where your app or where your tool fits into the wider scheme of what's at their disposal. There's a few pitfalls that I just want to, and some limitations of tactics that I just want to bring to attention as you think about what tools best work for you to capture user insights. You want to pick it for the right tool, right task, and the right process. But even within each tool, and why I always talk about mix and match your tools, don't just pick one, and don't just pick one and one level of tools. What you find is that level ones can collect opinion-based data, but they don't allow for any interaction, so they get some of those high-level points. They're great even before or after interviews, or level twos, I should say. They don't always have to follow this order of a level one, level two, then level three. And I should have made that point. You can often, and I often do, start with a 2 or a 3, and then I just want to validate some of these activities. Does everybody do this? Is this really, really common? And then you can go back and run a survey to track certain things. So in no way does that mean to level 1s, 2s, and 3s indicate an order of tactics. It's just sort of the level of information you gather in each tactic. Level 2s, like I said, I love level 2s. I do them all the time. But you are scripted. So it limits you because you're going to ask them what you know to ask them. So if it didn't cross your transom to be exploring a certain area, you have a script in front of you and you won't find that and you won't be asking about that. However, that's where level 3s come into play because sort of you set up an environment and you set up a scenario of the kinds of work that they do, where you're focusing your efforts, and then you see what you see. And so that really is much more open in terms of what you can learn, and it's kind of, you don't know what you don't know. You will in a level 3. You might not be able to be as successful in that regard with a 2. So level 2s give you a script, and level 3, there's usually no script, but you have research goals. And then mistakes to avoid in the process. You want to make sure you ask your user community in the right segments for their feedback. You don't want to lead the witness, or you don't want to point out things on the screen if you're asking them to find things, and then, mistakenly showing them where things are. You want them to be able to do it on their own. Applying the wrong research tactic at the wrong time can be a challenge, and then you won't get the information that you need. And then applying a process incorrectly. So you do want to know what you're doing, whether it's from surveys to level 1s, 2s, or 3s. So in my little wrap-up here, I did like that little equation. I didn't make it up, like I said, but I saw it somewhere. And the UX minus the user is an X, and don't do it. That's sort of the lesson of the day. There are 3 levels of CI, or customer insight tactics, that help you determine what's right for your project. So that little picture there is kind of a framework of what you can do around level 1s, level 2s, and level 3s. Like I said, you'll want to incorporate more than one level of activity and insight into your process. And let your decisions be guided by the business research goals, complexity, investment, and actually I probably should have added up here the phase of development that you're in. And so that's all I have.